Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first talk on the Applied Games track for the conference. Games are the Future of Wildlife Storytelling by Gautam Shah. Really excited to kick this off. So, before we start off, we would like to just thank our sponsors for the event. So, we have the presenting sponsor, Unreal Engine, gold sponsors, MPL, AWS, Glance, and Junglee. Legacy silver sponsors GameShin, Lakshya, and YesNo. Bronze sponsors Quali and Gameon. Hypercasual track sponsor Sunday. IP Connector sponsors Succeed Innovation Fund. So really would like to thank our sponsors for the event. Before I introduce our speaker for the day, I would just like to share a few important notifications that could help you actually have a better experience of the talk. So for all those who are new to this platform, you will see a Q&A tab on your right. There's a section that says Q&A just below the discuss. So the discuss panel, you all can use it to talk to each other, to share any comments, any observations that you have. The Q&A panel is specifically for questions. So if you do, which I'm sure you will, you'll have many questions. So you can post those questions out at any point during the talk. Feel free to just type in your question there. And at the end of the talk, we will have about 10 to 15 minutes for question and answers. So we will try and moderate that bit. And from the pool of questions that we have, we'll pick and we'll try and answer all of them if possible. So that's one important notification. Another important notification is that we do have a feedback form, which will be really helpful if you can fill it in. It will help us design a better experience as we go forward in the coming year. So please do leave your thoughts, your suggestions on that feedback form. We will publish it very soon. You will see it in the handout section, and you will see it in the discuss panel. So if you just go to handouts, you would see it published in a bit. I'll do that once the talk starts. So yeah, I think that's for what we have to keep in mind for the talk. And now it's time to introduce Mr. Gautam Shah. So our talk for today is games are the future of wildlife storytelling, and the person that I'm going to introduce is Mr. Gautam Shah. He is the founder of Internet of Elephants. He is a National Geographic Fellow, and the Internet of Elephants basically is a social enterprise that develops groundbreaking digital tools to engage people with wildlife. And through their endeavors, they tell stories of individual animals studied by conservation organizations and researchers all over the world. And the way they do this is through unique mobile games, augmented reality, and data visualizations that use GPS and other data gathered about animals. And Gautam hopes to catalyze whole new approaches to engaging the public with wildlife. The first time I played one of the games, I was completely fascinated, and it was a beautiful experience. So I'm really excited to call him on. I'd like to invite Gautam to come live now on the virtual stage. Hi, Gautam. Welcome to our first talk. Excited to have you here. And can you hear us?
I can hear you, Sarah.
Okay, so I will hand over this to you, and I'll see you at the end.
Okay, I don't have to press anything else now, right? We're good.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay, super. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks very much. Really excited to be here. My name is Gautam Shah. I'm calling you here from a place called Nanyuki in Kenya, so right on the equator, about 3 hours north of Nairobi. I'm a little bit nervous because normally when I give these talks, I'm giving these talks to wildlife audiences and conservation audiences, and therefore anything that I show them about games is amazing to them. And now I'm talking, of course, in front of a big games audience, which has a little bit of a different standard, but hopefully you'll find something very interesting from the whole thing. So I'm going to share my screen. So yes, today I am talking about games as the future, as the future of wildlife storytelling as part of a company called Internet of Elephants. Um, Before I jump into that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. These are all photographs that were taken before I got into wildlife conservation and before I was what I would consider now a wildlife conservation professional. So I used to be part of the IT sector. I spent 20 years working for a large IT organization called Accenture. Actually, 4 of those years were working for Accenture in Mumbai. Um, but there, and what I would do is I would spend all my holiday time, and I would spend, the salary that I'd made in my savings, and I'd go on these amazing wildlife trips all over the world. And I've been lucky enough to be with all sorts of animals and all sorts of spectacular places, and so that was really my passion. But it got to be a point where it felt very, very selfish, where like these experiences that I was having were really only for me. And there was not really any benefit that was going back to the wildlife that I was seeing or the communities that lived around the areas that I was going. And so there came a point where I just quit. I quit, what was a perfectly good job, and decided to get into wildlife conservation. Although I had really absolutely no idea what I was going to do. Now, when I tell people the story, or when I've kind of talked about this in the past, usually the first question that comes to me is, well, how did you develop this passion and this interest in wildlife? And I think this is not a picture of me, by the way. It's my nephew, but I think my perspective is that passion, that love for wildlife exists amongst everybody. When you're a kid, all your toys, all your clothing, all your books, all your movies, everything is about animals. Everything is about wildlife. You've got inherently a natural connection with animals, a natural connection with wildlife, a natural love for those things. And I was no different. I had the same thing. But then, as we all know, life goes on. Most of us live in these very populated urban environments. Your friends, video games, your job, girlfriend, wife, husband, millions of things start to kind of consume your life on a day-to-day basis. And while you never necessarily lose that love and that attraction to wildlife, the opportunity for it to really be part of your daily life and for it to be something that you're thinking about on a regular basis, that's something that that erodes over time. And even for myself, although I was lucky enough, again, to kind of keep my connection through those wildlife holidays, a life, primarily in Chicago and Mumbai and other places wasn't very conducive to staying connected with nature. But what this really got me thinking about was, that's what seems to be the most important thing, is how do we keep people connected with nature? How do we make sure that love and that affinity towards animals and towards wildlife when we were a kid, how does that become something that stays with us, throughout life? And I started really looking into the conservation sector and thinking like, okay, well, what are the things that the conservation sector is doing, in order to create that engagement, in order to create that feeling of connection? And sadly, I kind of divided it into these different categories of things that happen. And so of course, you have donation campaigns, and you've probably all seen these donation campaigns, and they always have a big donate button. They're typically trying to appeal to the fact that animals are cute, or appeal to the fact that there's this gloom and doom that's happening around nature. There's of course nature documentaries, some of which are pretty spectacular. But both of these, they really do kind of reach a limited audience. That audience might in some cases be large, but it's really the same tent. You're reaching the same people over and over and over and over again. There are a certain set of people that watch nature documentaries. In the grand scheme of things, it's a very small set of people. And there's a certain set of people that will always donate to wildlife campaigns, but again, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small set of people. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you have zoos. Now zoos, there's good zoos, there's bad zoos, but there's zoos all over the world. And I think last year 800, or no, not couldn't have been last year. Pre-COVID, it was around 800 million people per year that were visiting zoos, and so they don't have they're able to reach these big audiences, but there's a lot of collateral damage, especially from bad zoos, in terms of how the animals are treated, how the animals are curated, whether they have any conservation benefit at all. But it is an opportunity for people in urban areas to stay connected. And then there's this section in the middle, which is trophy hunting and wildlife tourism, which it's sort of in the worst of both worlds, in that it has a limited audience and it creates collateral damage. And so I really started to think about, like, okay, well, what are we doing here? This is not the way forward if we want to keep people engaged with wildlife. I started just kind of looking and feeling things out, and did a little bit of research, and we found, like, if you take who are the people that are showing an interest, who are the people that are showing an interest in wildlife, either through what they do or through the way that they express themselves. And we came up with a number of 1.1 billion, and that's 16, those people aged 16 and over that have access to the internet. So that's a pretty massive number. And then we really looked at, and where are people spending their time? And it obviously comes to no surprise to anybody in this group, people are spending their time playing games. This number is always evolving. The latest number that I have is 2.7 billion people across the world, playing mobile games. And then we really started to look at the intersection of that, and it's that's potentially around 777 million people, give or take 100 million people in this way, where we felt like, wow, there's a huge cross section between people who are interested in wildlife that are also gamers. We are not, as a conservation sector, taking advantage of this reality. And so I really started to think about, I played games when I was a kid. I always kind of believed in games. I'm not a big, was never a big gamer necessarily myself, but I really started to look at, well, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we thinking about games as a means for communicating wildlife stories, of keeping people engaged? There's so many advantages, and I'm going to go through these quickly because I know that you guys all believe in this already. I don't need to convince you, but obviously the first thing that comes to mind is that they're active. You're actively doing something. You're involved. You're not kind of sitting back on a couch and passively watching something. Secondly, you take on an identity and a role. You have a role to play. You are. Sorry, having a little PowerPoint there. You are the animal. You are the player. You are the researcher. You are the scientist. You have a role to play. Third is you've got agency. There's decisions you can make, and the decisions that you can make affect the outcome, which of course creates this feedback loop in terms of whether you're doing well. And whether you're not doing well, and various aspects of that within the game, and then of course finally it's social. And again, you can't sit on your couch and watch a nature documentary and be entirely social about it. You can't really do that with wildlife tourism, other than with the people that are within the Jeep. And so games, they just have this incredible capacity to tell stories, to activate, to engage, to keep people involved in something on a daily basis. It's where people are, it's what people are doing, and it always just felt kind of almost criminal to me that we weren't taking advantage of it. And so I did. I started the company Internet of Elephants to do exactly that. And specifically, what we do is we take scientific data about animals and their habitats. And we turn them into games and data visualizations and other digital experiences that are intended to engage the public with wildlife conservation. So we work with conservation partners that already have the scientific data. We're not gathering it. We're not gathering it ourselves. We create stories directly out of that data, and I'll give you an example or a couple of examples of how that happens. We turn those stories into games and visualizations. And then, we look for creative outlets and ways to distribute to our target audiences, to make sure that enough people see it for it to be impactful. Probably the thing that's top of mind for you is like, well, what do you mean by data? I don't necessarily get that. And in the space of wildlife and in the space of conservation, one of the great things is that technology advancements are making a big difference to scientific research. They're making a big difference to interventions in the field. Whether that be drones or sensors or acoustic technology or satellites that are now tracking animals, all over the world. The amount of technology that's being used and the amount of data that's being gathered is pretty spectacular, and it's increasing in terabytes and terabytes of data now. And so we've got descriptive data, we've got data about their location, we've got data about movement, we've got data about the history of an animal, about their behavior, what they eat. There's eDNA, that's being used right now. We can understand the health of different animals simply by collecting samples. And of course, there's a tremendous amount of data just in terms of what's kind of going on in the wildlife trade and trafficking area. Now, typically, all this data, kind of comes to play by these amazing researchers and conservation organizations, and it ends up in scientific journals. It ends up in publications, and there's a huge scientific benefit to that, absolutely. But it's such an incredible wealth of data that I always felt like that's something that could be incredibly engaging, to the public. So effectively, what Internet of Elephants does is try and take all of that data, all that information that's going into those journals, and then create different types of digital experiences, coming from it. So this very same scientific data that's already being collected on incredible amounts of animals now becomes available to the public in a form and in a manner that's already of interest to them in a place that they already are that they're at. So I'll give you some examples. This is a little bit of a chronology of some of the things that Internet of Elephants has done. In the very, very beginning, we were just trying to see, is the data interesting? Can you tell stories? Can you tell stories from that data?
I was just about to show you a little demonstration of something that we did very early on with kind of evaluating how to make a story out of dots on a screen.
Fleur and Valentine are sisters who live with their 6 adolescent cubs near Lake Elementita. As a pride, they remain close to each other 90% of the time for protection, cooperative hunting, and social bonding. When Valentine is ready to find a mate, she makes 2 trips into the adjoining Nakuru National Park. She remains in the area for approximately 3 days each time, probably accompanied by a male lion. On her second trip back to her pride, we see that something is blocking her way. The once non-functioning electric fence has been fixed, and she cannot get through. Valentine becomes stressed and hungry and nearly dies. Researchers intervene to transport Valentine back to Fleur and the rest of the pride. Soon after, she gives birth to 3 new cubs.
So that's an example. It was one of the very first things that we did, just to look at, okay, how can you tell stories, from data? And then, a couple of years ago, again, augmented reality started to become a thing, and we really wanted to see, like, okay, how can we start to tell real stories about real animals and real wildlife by bringing them a little bit closer to you, bringing them into your living room, bringing them, into your backyard. And of course, now this is very, very commonplace, but back then it was kind of a totally new thing to be trying. And so we partnered with a number of different conservation organizations to tell the stories of real animals and start seeing how people could use creativity with those animals. And here's something that somebody put together. So with some of what we learned from augmented reality, our next big thing was to actually try and put that together into an actual game. And this was probably our first big opportunity with a game which we call Wilderverse, and we partnered with an organization in Borneo and an organization in the Congo to try and bring the stories of 4 real animals that they were researching, to life, again in augmented reality. This idea that I could try and recreate this virtual forest wherever I am, and do the very same things that a researcher might do. So you have conversations through chat with the actual researchers on the ground that are also conveying the actual conservation storyline, that are telling you about the issues on ground, but really telling you about what's the real life of a researcher in Borneo or the Congo that's studying these apes. You're then given missions to go on, and the missions you take are represented through augmented reality and wherever you are. So we create essentially this virtual holographic forest, wherever you are, and then you're given missions. And now I'm actually kind of playing a little bit of a hidden object game in augmented reality, trying to go around and look for those particular objects, but again, are the same things that a real researcher might be looking for. But all the while, of course, I'm also trying to find the animals themselves. This is Fio the orangutan. One of the challenges here, of course, was it's difficult to make it realistic that the orangutan is actually in the trees. But we started to play with space and even kind of create the situation where if you get too close, he'll run away. If you get too close to the gorilla, you're warned about what's happening. But you're searching through the forest. You're looking for these animals. You're looking for all the different types of evidence of those particular animals as you're playing, and you're getting the conservation storyline as you go along. And one of the challenges that we had is we built this game to be played entirely outdoors, and it was releasing just as COVID hit. And so releasing a game to get everybody outdoors when nobody was allowed to go outdoors was not something that that was a great situation. So we also went ahead and created the version that you could play indoors within your own living room, so you can actually explore these forests, look for these animals without actually moving your feet, without moving your feet at all. And then, one of the last games that we created was actually just using completely and totally different data. And this was a situation where we wanted to see, can we gamify data? And can we gamify a data visualization? And so there was an organization that had done a study across Southeast Asia, India, Nepal, looking for clouded leopards. And they had laid camera traps over 10 years. And they had gathered around 5 million different photographs. Again, all of this was ending up in scientific journals. And what we wanted to see is, well, that's fascinating. I mean, they found 250 different species in these camera traps. How can that entire story come through in a game so that any of us that don't really fully understand the science and don't want to read through the scientific journals can really still get an understanding of what are these animals that are out there? What are these real images that people are taking, and what is involved in the process of making something like this. And so that's where we built Unseen Empire. You can go to all the actual locations where these studies happened. You place the camera traps start firing, and then the images that you start seeing are the real images that are out there. And of course, what you're trying to do is identify what these animals are, all the while getting better, adding to your collection of animals that you've seen along the way. Leveling up, all the standard kind of things that happen within games in that way. And by the end of it, you've actually seen 400 of the different images that exist, and you get a data visualization, of the entire study. It's not always games and it's not always data visualizations. One of the challenges, as I'm sure many of you know, is how do you get this stuff out to people? It's fine to create these, kind of beautiful experiences and things, but how is it going to reach people? And that's something that we're always thinking about. And so one of the things that we've done is we've partnered with IGDC to use their digital running app to let people actually, compete. So as I'm tracking my own fitness, as I'm tracking my own runs, I'm actually seeing how I'm doing against real animals in the wild based on the GPS collars, that they're wearing. So the first year we did this with the snow leopard in Mongolia, and then the next year we did it with a tiger, a pangolin, an elephant, and then this year with a mountain lion. So as you're running, again, you can see how you're doing in relation to how these animals are actually the actual distances they're going, and you're competing against them during that campaign. All the while, there's a storyline that's coming in because again, the premise is that these animals themselves are logging their runs and they're telling the stories of what happens in their daily lives. And so you do get the storylines. These animals start to take on a character. And so it's not just I ran 10 kilometers and the elephant ran 12, but I'm getting a glimpse into what's actually happening within what they do. Some of the things that we have not yet launched, but that we're really looking into, one of the games is called Howlers and Growlers. This is a game all about mimicking animals. And so here the real data that we use is animal sounds. And we've developed technology that allows you to compare how your animal mimicry, compares to the actual animal in real life. And so that's intended to be a little bit more of a party game. And we're actually even looking into how can we start, potentially betting using lotteries and using different techniques like this to follow animal migrations and bring people into the fold of these long animal migrations of whales, caribou, elephant, and etc. But start placing bets, which I understand is controversial, but start placing bets on what might happen, and therefore also start paying attention to what's happening to wildlife on a regular basis. Look, we're not the only ones that are thinking about wildlife, and I should say, just in summary, everything that we do, it's always in partnership with wildlife NGOs. So every single product that we've done has always been in partnership with incredible organizations that are out there. They all use real wildlife data, and they all bring in a level of storytelling to try and make it more emotionally compatible with the player that's playing. We are not the only organization that's out there that's really making games about wildlife. We might be the only one that's fully dedicated to it. There are some pretty great games. These are some of the ones that I know of that are my favorites in terms of games that are about wildlife. But the reality is, it's just not where it's not where it should be. And if I can leave you with anything, it's to think about, as we think about the metaverse, as we think about NFTs, as we think about online gambling, as we think about documentaries, how is wildlife going to be represented in these platforms? How is wildlife going to be represented in these areas? And that's what we're thinking about. It is my fundamental belief that games are going to play a significant role. Quite honestly, in the state of the planet and the state of the environment, because public engagement with these things is critical. The public is playing games, and what we're really trying to do is to make sure that platform is an agent for incredible change for biodiversity. So with that, I'll leave it at that. Again, apologies, 1,000 apologies for the technical interruption in the middle. But I think now I'm happy to take any of your questions if you've got any, or feel free to reach out to me separately at any point if you're interested in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Gautam. So what I'll do is I'll just pick out the questions as they were sent. Do let me know if you can see it on the left hand side of your screen at the bottom. I think one just got picked. Did you see it?
I can see the questions. Do you want me to just take them in the order that I see them?
Yeah, sure. That would be fine. Yeah. Let me know if you need any help. You can just read them out loud in case
okay.
You won't see it.
Okay, so hey Gautam, I'm seeing a lot of overlap with mapping, social, and tracking game design elements in what you're showing us. How are you guys bridging the gap between your products and users building their own graphic communities around your products like games often have? That's a fantastic question. And that's been a big discussion for us. That's been a big discussion for us this year. Just to let you inside a little bit, as a company, we have to decide whether it makes sense for us to continue to be the ones that have to create the experiences, or whether in fact what we should be doing is we should be providing the platform that anybody else can create the experiences from, right? So if I provide an individual, if I provide a company, if I provide a studio, if I provide a corporate with all the data, with all the characters, with all the storytelling, and I can package that in a particular way, doesn't the power of the public and the power of all these organizations to actually create the experiences become much more powerful than just one single company trying to create all those experiences ourselves? So I think that's a great question. I think that's absolutely what we're looking into. I think in some ways we may have to seed the market with a few different experiences so people can get an idea of things like Run Wild, like, oh yeah, a fitness company can really take advantage of this type of data to create these type of engaging, experiences for their users. And individuals can start doing the same thing, and they can use their own creativity around it. But yeah, I totally agree. The real power in this is, how can other people pick it up? How can other people start creating these experiences, and us just be the enablers of it rather than the experience creators always. And happy to carry, just to let you know, I mean, it's a big conversation. I think it's a fantastic question. Very, very happy to carry on that discussion offline. Next question. I have a question that I'm seeing in international, that iconic video game characters are getting movies for being very old and legendary franchises, but in India, can we haven't any iconic characters? I'm not 100% sure whether I'm understanding the question, if it's very specific about India or not. I can say something about film, and that I think that film has, of course, done an incredible job about creating iconic characters, generally fictional characters. And what we're really looking at, I mean, as an example, I think we've calculated that around $400 million a year are spent on wildlife films and wildlife documentaries, and almost nothing, a tiny fraction of that is being spent on wildlife games. So one is, I think that absolutely has to change. I think it can change, in any particular geography. I think the other thing, if you're asking a question about India, India specifically, I've been fortunate enough to see a lot of my wildlife in India. In general, I think that Indian wildlife doesn't get as much attention as its African counterparts, and we're always looking for ways to try and change that. And again, especially with the size of the gaming community in India and the amazing diversity and biodiversity that exists there, I just see no reason why we can't start creating iconic characters. And iconic characters don't always have to necessarily come from the most iconic animals. They can come from very, very obscure animals that people don't know about, and that's something that definitely interests me. How does one measure the impact? Do these experiences translate into awareness in the room? That's another fantastic question. It is really, really hard, and we have to look at it in two different ways. So one is, we have to think, what's the long term? I always think about what's the long term impact that we're trying to have, and what's our role? What's our role in that particular impact? So when you think about any single video game, I don't think that there's any single video game that's going to have in itself, that particular impact. But what you want to ultimately see over time is, you want to see consumer markets changing, right? Like, you want to see the products that people are buying, the services that people are buying, and the products and services that organizations and companies are offering, to become much more environmentally friendly, to become much more wildlife friendly. You're also wanting to see policy change, and you're also wanting to see available finance become much greater. These things are only going to happen. When it's the will of the people that wants them to happen. So people will drive the markets, people will drive policy in democratic countries, and people will drive available financing. So the long game in this is, how do we make sure that people have wildlife as part of their daily life, that every day there's something that I'm doing where wildlife is top of mind, in the same way that sports, movies, politics, television, etc. is. that's a 20 to 30 year, that's a 20 to 30 year goal. So it's extremely difficult to measure. We're not going to be the ones that make it happen, but we want to hopefully catalyze that. And again, we think that games plays a huge role. If people are playing games about wildlife every day, they're thinking about wildlife every day. And over the long term, each of those three things are the things that we want to impact. In the short term, we have to look at each individual product. We did do a study on Wilderverse. It was just done, an academic study out of Oxford, into the actual impact of Wilderverse. Playing Wilderverse for 4 hours versus watching BBC Planet Earth for 4 hours, and the impact that it had on people's attitudes and their desire to donate, etc. We have to do studies like that. We have to kind of use focus groups and understand what they're doing. But we also can look at campaigns like we did with Adidas. And that particular campaign that they ran, which was, only 10 days, 10 days, and they run, maybe 30 different campaigns in the year. The campaign that had the greatest engagement for them was the Run Wild campaign. And so, that again starts to show evidence, like animal content can be very, very effective. Animal content can keep users engaged. And if we have that type of success with Adidas, right, that starts to become evidence to try and have that type of success with other corporates that can then look at that and say, like, wow, if we create an engaging way to keep people informed about wildlife content, that's good for us as a business. That's good for for our users, and that's kind of good for conservation. So we have to, it's a very complicated question and a complicated answer, but there's both short-term things that we have to look at in terms of, is every single product that we're creating showing additional evidence of the ability to engage people with animal content and wildlife content, especially audiences that typically don't look at it, and then kind of the overall long-term impact of what that's going to be.
Gautam, I'll just intervene here for a quick bit. You can skip the next question. What are some comments? Or you can move on to the other. Hi, Gautam. I'd like to know how AR technologies are growing. So that one, and also a quick update for the audience. We will extend this for another. We're at 6:53, so another 7 minutes. So because there was a delay and we don't want to compromise on this valuable time of Q&A, so it will extend up to 7 minutes. Sorry for the delay. Yeah, Gautam, you can continue.
Okay, so you want me to go on to, I'd like to know how AR technologies are growing in the future, and what are the software we can use to develop AR stuff. To tell you the truth, my guess is that there are other forums within the India Game Developers Conference that are going to be much, much better at answering sort of the questions around the future of AR, and the right technologies, et cetera, to build it on. I did recently watch a talk from Niantic's CEO about Lightship, and all the thing that's happening in terms of making location-based games much more ubiquitous and easy, which is something that I wish we had when we were building Wilderverse, and struggling with all of that and having to take out functionality that we wanted because it was too complicated to create. And now it's just there. Everything that we wanted to do with AR and Wilderverse, and even AR with Safari Central, and we struggled to create on our own, is now just kind of there and available for us in the platform, and it would have saved us an incredible amount of time, and been much better. So I personally, I'm a lot more bullish on AR than VR, but again, there are I'm sure a host of people within the conference that are much better positioned to kind of talk about the future and give you insights into the technologies that you could be using. If I have a story and it's good in my opinion and want to make a game, how can I communicate with the companies so that we can share the stories with the devs to make games, and we can eventually have experience on directing, and then we can become a director of it? Again, I think I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I knew nothing about games, at least the games industry, when I started. I'm still, learning a tremendous amount myself. I have the same question, right? I'm always thinking about how can we tell these stories to the people that, that have the power to make them come true. My personal approach is just to continuously build my network, continuously try and get introduced, some people talk about going into stealth mode. I'm never in stealth mode. I am always in make sure everything is available and out there. I look for every opportunity to blog, to join Slack groups, etc., and just make sure that you're that you appear in front of people and get introduced to people that you want to. But I don't have any magic formula for that. I would love to hear more about AR and how can a simple developer like me learn more about it. Again, just kind of going back to my, my previous answer, I think there's plenty of resources within IGDC that can really help you understand the power of AR, the different technologies and platforms that allow for it. Everything that we did was using the Google platform and the Apple platform to make that easier for us. Obviously, a lot of it isn't just the AR, but it's the quality of the animations and it's the quality of the models that you create. But I think so some simple research out there and some simple trainings out there will make it very evident. One thing that I did learn was that it's not that hard. Certain things were hard. A lot of the location-based stuff I thought was hard, and getting the GPS and the compass and all that kind of stuff working. But not all AR applications need to worry about that. And so we quickly learned that the developers that we had on our team also had never done anything with AR and were able to come up to speed on augmented reality and create some of these apps within a short period of time. I want to know when metaverse will involve. I guess I don't understand that question, so I'm going to skip it. How metaverse impact on game development? What is the loss that game developers face in the future? I don't fully understand that question either. It just seems like there's from my perspective, unless I'm missing something, there's an incredible future for game developers. The game sector is not shrinking. It's growing at an incredible rate, and I just don't see any reason why it wouldn't continue. I mean, things always shift. Technologies shift. The skill sets that you need to know and the skill sets that you need to develop and the way that you apply them are all always shifting. I mean, when I started my career at Accenture, I was coding in COBOL, that shifts. And as long as you shift along with it in terms of the types of applications and the types of products that are being created, I just don't see that there's any. Unless I'm getting the question wrong, I don't see that there's really any loss for game developers. It's just gonna grow and grow and grow.
So Gautam, we just have a couple
as you love wildlife so much, then what's your opinion on the Naughty Dog recent games like Uncharted and The Last of Us? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that it has anything to do with my love of wildlife. I think it just has to do with the way I think we need to communicate. And so there's a lot of different approaches to storytelling and a lot of different approaches to like what you're trying to evoke from your audience when you storytell. And I think each of these approaches has a role. But my biggest concern on anything is that the stories that are being told, especially if you're trying to tell a story about wildlife, the ecosystems, environments, etc., that they're telling the truth, that they're authentic, and that they're nuanced. And so I'm often told, really often, I'm surprised it hasn't come up here, but I'm often asked, like, why don't you create a game about killing poachers? And it's a shoot 'em up game, and you go out and you shoot poachers, and maybe that would be a good game, but the reason that that's not something that I'll ever create is because the storyline behind that is not authentic. The storyline behind that misses 99% of the nuances of the reality of what happens within poaching, and that in reality the poachers themselves are the smallest part of the problem. So I look at wildlife games. I look at what's the story that people are trying to tell. How is wildlife being depicted? I don't mind lots of different stories as long as what's being depicted is giving an authentic view of the situation and an authentic view of the reality on the ground. So if you want to present a dystopian future, that's fine. If you want to present something that's a little bit more cheery, that's fine. But again, I'm really looking into, is it authentic storytelling about the reality of conservation, or is it entirely fiction?
Yep, I think we've run out of time, Gautam. But you also managed to answer all the questions. The last one was just me being selfish, but that's okay. I can ask you that later. So I guess we reached the end of this talk, and it was a beautiful experience. Gautam, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for kickstarting the Applied Games track with this talk. And in spite of all the little glitches that we had, you handled it beautifully. So I'm really happy, and thank you, audience, for being so patient. And you had a lot of interesting questions. That's always the interesting part for me, to see how what are the questions that the audience have and what are you thinking? Because The talk is for you. So this is great. This was great. And